Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us. This is our second event as part of our inaugural Barbican Fest, celebrating some of our recent publications. And today we've got the brilliant Damion O. Spencer, who is going to be interviewed, grilled by, first of all, Maggie Hamand, who has a lot of experience as a writer, as a publisher, and who worked closely with Damien on editing this book and getting it ready to the brilliant result that we have with it. And of course, we have Barbican's own publisher, Martin Goodman, who again is a successful writer and publisher with lots of experience, and they're going to have a very engaging conversation with Damien on his book. So over to, I think, Maggie, you're going to start with us?
It's lovely to be here. It's lovely to see you, Damien.
Same here.
Damien and I worked mainly by email and whatever, so it's great to see you in person, as it were. Um, First of all, I just want to say how much I love this book, and I had the privilege of working with Damien on the um, master's online master's course
Right.
at Hull. So I had the privilege of working with um, Damien on that course and seeing some of the stories emerge and seeing his talent blossom. Um, Talk a little bit, Damien, to me about how the book began, because some of the stories had been published elsewhere, or maybe that happened during the course. Um, and let me ask, which was the first story? Where did it begin?
All right. The first story actually started on the course, Bull Buck and Duppy Conqueror. So I did that one while we're doing, I think, short stories. And I just tried my luck. I sent it out to the Caribbean writer and they picked it up. And, it was fantastic that they picked it up because, I was just trying to get into writing. And so it was a boost for me. But the entire project really started out of a health crisis I had. I was hospitalized at the time, and so I had this preoccupation with death and pondering my mortality and stuff like that. And so I found myself picking at the past like a scab, and then everything just started, pouring out. It was raw and you know all these emotions I was trying to figure out. So I was trying to heal at the time, sorry. And so what really happened is that it was a process of healing, but then it materialized into something greater. And all that raw emotion, working with you, I was able to fine tune it and just don't make it about myself. It became something that, we could share with the world because I realized that oftentimes when we think about ourselves or we get so coiled up in ourselves, we forget that we're not the only ones experiencing challenges. So, that's how it started, really.
Did did you have an idea that they might form a collection at the time, or were you just writing
None
individually?
whatsoever. I was just writing at the time. I was just letting out. I was in the hospital and I had nothing to do really. And you know, I I started saying, maybe it's best to write because Japan is a very quiet country. So I couldn't speak it out. I like speaking stories. I like oral stories. I like, just saying it like the incantation and all this stuff. But writing became a way of, letting it out. So I started scribbling, then I started recording on my iPhone, and it just started growing from there. So it was never a plan to publish or
Mhm.
anything.
So it's interesting that you say you were preoccupied with ideas around death at the time, because obviously
Right.
that's a theme that comes into all the stories,
Mhm.
and provides a kind of unifying link. But the stories also have all those internal links to one another, which I really enjoyed. So was that something you did later to create those links, or was it because there was an autobiographical element in the stories that the links were kind of already there?
So the thing is, like, I learned on the program, like, that the magic is in the editing or redrafting. And so I found that when I went back, I could pick up like different themes and so on, and very subtle themes. And I was able to add on what I had before, or just to make connections and segues. And, I found it very, very interesting to keep linking the stories. The thing is, I had this idea because my MA program was mostly about challenges. Like I was told, if you can't write about the weather, like a particular writer, then you shouldn't approach it. And that became a challenge for me. I was like, I'm going to try and write about the weather. So there was this thing about short stories that a reader will always choose where to go in the book. And I had an issue with that. So I wanted to have a say after the book leaves. So just little threads. So I thought about the web, like the Anansi web, the spider web. And I thought to myself, wherever you land in the book, whatever story you land on, there's always a thread if you go backward or forward. I wanted to try something new, like how I could connect all the stories. So if you go from this one to that one, there's a connection. And I think to some extent, I think it was successful, and it's something I plan to continue working on.
Great. And one of the things about the your writing which really intrigued me, of course, it is the voice, because you have this very strong voice and you kind of merge Jamaican language and standard English and
Right.
do that in a very free and intriguing way. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think some of the stories were in a stronger Jamaican language
Right.
originally, and some of those I found, coming from my background, quite
Mhm.
hard to access. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's Read Caribbean Month. June is celebrated as Read Caribbean Month, so it's really perfect to have this discussion about the Jamaican language. Um, I was terrified, to be honest, because I was trying to tap into a marketplace that I'm probably positive not many people would be receptive or would understand at the onset. But there's also the issue of not trying to self-censor yourself or to, cause any othering. I wanted to be confident in the language or how the characters speak. And so I took a chance and I think it paid off. I was happy to use the language as best as possible and then to explain it with the standard English. I saw it as an opportunity to use the standard English as a carrier oil for the Jamaican language because they're different and they're languages in their own right. And so my voice, I think, grew out of like a kind of hybrid. My grandfather and also a lot of women that I grew up with and how they speak, and I can still hear them in my head. So it was inescapable. I had to write like that. So I think I took a chance on it, and I hope it paid off. To be honest, I'm happy I wrote it like that.
But it has to be like that because that's the way, in a different language, you're in a sense in a different world, you're in a different way
Right,
of thinking. And
right,
so I think in order to capture that world that you're portraying, we have to have that language. It has
correct.
to, and also, of course, the dialogue, which I thought was fantastic.
Mhm.
Sometimes in the dialogue it's stronger because that's really how people are
I
speaking.
get carried away
And
sometimes, to be honest.
but you did absolutely create this world. I mean, that's one of the magical things about reading, isn't it? That you're sitting there in your own armchair and yet you're traveling, not
Right, right,
just in time and space, but also in your mind into other people, into other
right.
characters and other worlds. So I thought I found that quite exhilarating. So
And just to add to it too, Maggie, I actually like many Jamaicans speak Jamaican Creole, but to write it is an issue. And I did it in my first my undergraduates. I did Jamaican Creole. And so even then it was a challenge to write it so the readership would understand it. So you look at a language structure and then you have like we call the basilic aspect of the Jamaican Creole, which is deep into the science of the language. I don't think if we use that aspect of it, people would understand. So there had to be a middle ground just the same. And I know it's an issue now. Like I've heard people, spoke about it that if you're in the diaspora, you should consult with someone from Jamaica before you write in Jamaican Creole. But I have not been away from Jamaica that long to be considered someone in the diaspora or so on. And I've been trained in it too, and I'm proud of my language. So I'm just putting it out there that it's authentic, and I just hope people can appreciate it and don't just, be picky about it.
Great. And I wanted to ask you a question about the first story because Martin and I both felt there was more in that story that hadn't sort of come out, and we encouraged you, really quite pushed you to make that into a longer story. And I found the whole process of working with you on that was just so fascinating. Could you talk from your point of view a little bit about the editing process and how that was for you?
Ah, wow. I think it was like getting new prompts. First of all, I'm happy I got guidance and not like a nudge or any direction per se. I was allowed to manifest and to explore and to expand this story. Even the name got changed in the process. So because initially we wanted to, well, I wanted to call it cold weather cicada, and I just, added it there, and I was working with it, and it was fine. But I realized that when you label the story in the onset, it's also very restricting. And so I was allowed to expand on it and to travel and to go deeper. It was a process. And I think that's where I transitioned a lot from it being autobiographical to being more fictional. I was able to to allow the characters to grow and to take me places because a lot of it I didn't know where it would end up. But then I keep writing and ideas keep coming. And each time I would submit a piece to you and you know, you do your magic and you say, how about, expanding more or say something in this regard or whatever you think it needed more. I felt it was like a drive, like a motivation to write more because, like I said, this is my first real project and I was very timid at first, almost like experiencing imposter syndrome or whatever. But then I got into it and there was this ownership over time. And so I was able to, just let it out. And I think had it not been this kind of nurturing environment, it would have fell by the way and stopped earlier or didn't materialize into what it is. So I'm grateful for that too.
Well, it was wonderful working with you, Damien, and I just felt there was this connection, and it was great to see your work blossoming, and that includes over the master's course as well. So
Thank
I'm
you.
I'm so happy to be here waving your book,
Oh
which
yeah,
is
yeah.
fabulous,
Thank
and we
you.
want we want we want more people to know about it. I'm going to hand over to Martin at this point because I know he's got some questions, and I can see there are some questions coming through on the chat.
Okay.
So over to you, Martin.
Thanks a lot, Maggie, and thanks for that conversation. I'd like to start, please, Damien, by asking you just to read. And we've asked you to prepare a couple of short sections. It'd just be great to hear you freeing up your
Okay.
voice and giving your story to us.
All right. So for the first reading, we're gonna move to Death comes in threes. That's on page 74. I wanted to start with this story because it's almost like an invitation into the Jamaican setting. It's very immersive, and it's also from a young protagonist. And I think the innocence of it all is a good way for persons to come to the book, come to the story, come to the setting. Please bear with me. I'm going to be taking a bit of liberties. I might be cutting some inflections. Kevin, come here a little bit. She was the kind of woman who would wait until you were doing something before demanding your attention. The type to call you back to the yard when you already walk a mile. I went with the rake held up to my chest. Oh, you were raking? Yes, auntie. Anyway, Pat just called me to the fence and Pinchy tell me that piggy body float up all the way in Ginger Bottom. I could feel a disappointment coming on. Just last week they chop a good thief to death in Labyrinth, she said. Death come in trees. There it was. I was waiting for it. Until death, whoever that was, killed a third person. I would be stuck in the yard catching the house color. Then again, that blasted piggy should count as two, since he was both a fool and an idiot. He got to go abroad and decided to take a last swim in Jamaica because he didn't think there were rivers where he was going. And who steals a goat this time of year? I thought that was a Christmas season thing. These two had to spoil it for me. I hadn't heard Auntie come out. Usually, her hip would have shoved the mahogany dinner table, set halfway in the doorway. But she had gone and fret away her weight. Now she and her clothes were in malice, the kind only seen between a shade and its lampstand. Pastor Parry, her husband, just up and left one day. Rumor had it that he had found foreign woman and was living somewhere on the north coast. Auntie was never the same. Her days were spent searching for what was left of her mind in Master God empty sky and tormenting me. Your mouth moving, but you're not saying anything. I'm not saying anything, Auntie. Please to stare right in this yard, you hear me? Not a backside. I had spent all summer collecting empty bottles, selling them 50 cents a piece to buy my goggles. You know how many people call me buckle police for the extent to which I search high and low for those bottles? All that sacrifice would be in vain, not the backside. It was August 1992. The guinea crop was coming to an end, and the leaves that remained crisp up and fell like it was nobody's business. Together with the whitish ackee blossom brushed off by the bees before the daily rake, the yard looked as if it had caught fire the night before. I sat in the crotch of the parson brown orange tree with my face skyward. It was then I thought about you. Yes, you in that iron bird being flown to some other interesting place. I wonder what us inland folks look like to you from up there. Maybe nothing like resort beaches littered with sweet almonds and sea biscuits. I imagine your eyes must be those of a big black jankro, one caught up into the heavens and the warm morning air, free and with a good view of everything. I closed my eyes and pictured it all. Hills hump and bow towards the White River Valley, a herd of Jamaica blacks drinking out at a watering hole. Out from the rocks, the river oozes and silver on the green, the way snails ruin a callaloo crop. Houses cotch on the hillsides, cook fires smoke as if coal kilns had broken too soon. The sky, a freshly washed blue sheet spread out on a line, clean, except for darker shades of blue in places like wet spots waiting on the sun. And the breeze was a screech, the likes of a mongoose chased by a culling mob. It came over the backs of each hill, wrapping a smell that was sweet, fresh, and rotten at the same time. But I didn't have those eyes. Hell, I couldn't even go past the orange tree, let alone leave the yard. And I envied you. Yes, you and that iron bird going someplace interesting. And
Thank you very much, Damion. That was a powerful story, powerful storytelling, beautiful to hear as well. I love the music of your reading. It was really And I'm changing my opening question because of that. I'm going to jump forward in the book a little bit to page 89 and at Vita.
Okay.
And it's really a question about the narrator's voice and who is the narrator in this story and in these stories. How does that change around? I'm going to read it. That's going to disappoint everybody. How do you mourn a dead baby? It starts. First, if you're anything like a me, you know not to believe everything the big degree people have to say about such things. You already know to find out from someone who had to bury a child. If not, begin by taking the taxi from Ochi to Gale. I won't carry on because, like I say, I'll be disappointing people with my reading. But so
Bye.
who is this? That it isn't you. It's a narrator, first of all, who's talking against the big degree people. So it's somebody without that education, closed into that society. And but you get a really strong sense of Padvita coming out of this, but also about from the narrator as well, the spokesperson, the storyteller. So
Right.
could you tell us something about that third person storyteller in your book?
So this one is it's a very close third person to Pat Vita. It's almost if you're not careful, like at some point, and this is something Maggie and I spoke about, sometimes it almost like it transitioned into Pat Vita and I had to rein it back. So this narrator is unknown, but the narrator is also someone who is familiar with the environment, the setting, and the situation. But it was really, really close, and at times it almost merged into Pat Vita's voice. So I had to be careful to make the distinction.
I noticed in your opening story, when I was in the earlier version of it all, there was a little bit of merging between Dennis and Damien sometimes. And
Right,
I'm not going to ask you that hoary question: how much of you is Dennis, and etc.
right.
Obviously, there are patterns. It's Dennis sick in a COVID era Japan with a wife whose first initial begins with T, and so but so what I
There
see
are inspiration. They're a
inspiration.
bit
Yeah.
of inspiration, but it's fiction. It's fiction.
It's fiction. I know. I accept that. So, in what way, though, is this Dennis um, being an exploration of
Well, the thing
self
is,
in the book?
um, Dennis's experiences, like knowing these places, going, traveling on the train and stuff like that, those are my experiences to be,
Mm,
not that I live them, but I understand these
mm.
routes and I understand, going around Shinjuku and so on. So I guess I gave that to Dennis. And so sometimes it was there was some kind of intersection there. But I think as a writer, when you explore um, where a character is going, and then you're looking for information to give this character, like most of what we did for the book, I did it without getting to go out sometimes because it was COVID time and so on. So a lot of it is the imagination. And so I relied a lot on my experience and my, the information I have and research or so on. But my characters, I think they relied on me for a lot of the development.
Yeah, but and also what I found in my own writing, just looking back on it now retrospectively, is that my writing in that fictional world, I would say that primarily I'm a novelist, is seeking to understand something about life as I see it, as I live it, as I have it around it. And so I wondered to what extent you're doing that. You're in this really closed, difficult time, within Tokyo, and to what extent fiction helps you to come to an understanding of that period. So, what fictive elements came in that really helped you build a narrative from which you can understand that
Well,
life
it
more
was
deeply?
liberating, to be honest. It
Mm.
was liberating. I was able to travel with my imagination. And even though we were home, we were getting bits of news and so on. And like I've lost people in Jamaica at the time. And so all of that emotion and all of that tension, I think fiction brought me to a place where I could be free, like contending with all of these issues and being home, being on lockdown it was just so restrictive. So it's like an impediment, like you wanted to break free, and that's where it's like a valve open up, fiction where it's not like I was trying to escape, but it's how I could experience these emotions without having to suffer
Yeah.
through them. It was like I could give it to Dennis or give it to T or have
Yeah.
them show me how to grow out of this doldrum and I think that's pretty much the main part of it. It was liberating. It was an opportunity to feel without having to experience all of that pain.
It's
So
interesting. I
in
mean,
terms of element, yes, go ahead.
for me, you're a young writer, and
Right.
you're a debut. You even fit into some of the competition prize categories as sort of a young writer, an emerging writer, and yet you've taken death as the theme of your debut, which is just a pretty big deal. I'm going to read a little bit here. It's from that opening long novella type piece. Dennis felt less judgmental of the locals who moved on quickly when someone died. These are locals in Japan. He finally
Right.
realized that they were not entirely being cold the way they processed death. It was more about choosing to live. It was about drawing a line and telling yourself that no matter how life beat you down on you, you wouldn't go past that line. That was where you fight. I was interested in that as being almost like a motif for the book, and it almost seems like you're taking this semblance of death, which for you isn't a final thing. It's like an expression of life, and the dead very much in your book live on. But it's almost like a determination to pin down life and tell stories from life to keep the dead alive, to keep the dead alive. I mean, you have the dedication to your friend Leroy who passed, but you're bringing him back to life in your tale. Is that part of it all magic and life into being in your book?
So, Leroy is my cousin actually, and the my cousin and my mother passed during COVID, and I was not able to even go back for the funeral. But a bit of context. Growing up, I didn't look at loved ones when they're lying in the casket. It wasn't fear or anything, but I chose not to because I wanted to remember them being happy, alive, and so on. So it's my way of countering death, countering that finality of death. And I think it works for me because I'm able to lean into magical realism or folklore and explore death based on our own traditions. And we have a lot of traditions surrounding remembrance. So the book incorporated a lot of that too. And I was a bit selfish because Leroy and Spanner is my mom's nickname. They had larger than life personalities and they just went to the hospital and did not return. And I was a little bit turned off by it because I think they would want to go out the way they lived and they love the market. And so this was a bittersweet story to write, but I was able to write them doing something they loved. And it was like an opportunity to say goodbye, kinda. So yeah, I brought back some people to life, and that's the power of fiction. Yeah. So
That's
that
a
was
sweet and
very
precious.
important.
Yeah, it's a sweet and precious gift, Damien, and you did it really well. I mean, I know your mum, I know your cousin, and
Yeah, yeah,
it's
I
very.
shared it
And I
with the
want to know
world.
them more. I want to know them more.
Yeah. Well, the memoir I'm
Yeah.
working on, you'll
Okay.
get
Good.
to meet them, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And here's another question. My father once said that the happiest person he knew was this man who was a hedge cutter in Wales. So he went around cutting the hedges around the side of these little narrow winding roads, and he had never moved out of his village. He'd never been other than the hedge cutter in Wales. And I thought that man would never tell a story, he'd never be a writer. One of the things I feel about most big writers, and I think you're a big writer, is that they've been displaced. they've been taken out of their society. And some way then, where they then have to start storytelling to bring their story to where they are. You have to sort of
Right.
inhabit where you are with your story. And then it's filtered because you're telling it to your new people.
All right.
You're a Jamaican writer talking to us in England who's now got a life and a family life, and in some way a Jamaican family life in Tokyo. If you tell me
Mhm.
something about that purpose of displacement in your being a writer.
Well, the thing is, part of the book is how immigrants reconfigure a semblance of home wherever they are, and that's the truth of it, that we carry our country with us, our religion, our culture, and now it's not so good for immigrants because, it's like this big crisis that people are being displaced and so on. But personally, living in a new culture, um, sometimes you feel so detached from the familiar. And from a collectivist society, you thrive on the group, you thrive on support. And so I had to create that familiarity. I had to bring the ancestors. I had to bring the persons who would support me. And that's how I could cope in a new society, in a different culture, and so on. And well, speaking to persons in Japan, like through the book, I had to find the similarities. And I found that the Japanese are more superstitious than Jamaicans. There are so many superstitions, and that was my window. Well, actually a door, because it was so fun to even point it out. Like a lot of my Japanese friends, it's there, but then they don't think about it so much. And then for a foreigner to really pick up on these things and say, hey, this is how we think about it too. And once we found that commonality, it breeds community, and we could build on that. So that was an opportunity to explore for me.
Really? Thank you very much. Could you just give us your other reading now, please, and just so we can hear
Okay,
you
so
conjuring Jamaica into your little Tokyo apartment and the world, our world.
yeah, well, for the last one, I would like to share this from page 100, Spanner and Country. So this is the first time reading it since it's written, because it's a hard story for me. And I'm gonna pick up in the second paragraph, and I'm gonna go all the way to 102 in the second paragraph, and then I'm done. So not a lot. Kat and Marky return and announce for the crew to get themselves ready. Kat took the truck to pump hole to get gas. He noticed an oil leak underneath the old Bedford and got it patched up in some sort of way. Then he picked up market goers along the way back for the Coffee Walk Massive. Soon after, the truck was buried under a mountain of wooden boxes and crocus bags, which caused it to creep slowly like a snail. It carried dasheen, banana, pumpkin, and coconut. An oil slick like a slime trail, tail behind it all the way back to where it was last broken down. The old Bedford lumbered through the verdant hills of St. Catherine until it was tagging alongside the foaming rear cobra that galloped below the road in a well-watered valley. Redwood trees left naked from the Easter breeze were like scattered burnt wood in a coal fireplace against the ashy sky. Cat shift the gearbox into low gear. The black truck shell trembled the way a food pot would midway through a boil. The scene was completed with the steady bubble and froth of the river over the peeping rocks. It was peaceful, too peaceful. Journey-wearied higglers crammed in with the loads like livestock were flanked by bulky sidemen responsible for the hefting to load and offload everything. Two old women in the front seat began arguing over space. You can eat less, you know, the one up against the window said. At least me not using my teeth to dig my grave like a you, the other woman snapped while tapping her mouth. Together with Cat round the steering wheel, they completed the band of pariahs, bringing the market to town. The only trouble, they were traveling blindly into the Bagwalk Gorge. There could be an accident. It could rain and flood the road. There was no phone reception in the gorge, and with country's radio gone and none in the truck, they had no way of finding anything out. A few minutes later, as the shy evening sun sheltered its smile behind the mountains, the crunch of the tires over the stony road got lost under the quarrel of the two women. Cat turned to quiet them, and at that moment came upon an object in the middle of a corner. Tires screech, the horn blare, and everyone cry out to the heavens as the truck careened off the road. As they fell, their whole life flashed before their eyes. The tender reeds that banked the untamed rear cobra buckled under the weight of higlas, bananas, and coconuts thrown from the truck. Three women were sitting atop the market boxes when the ride started to flicker light and dark like a firefly behind. It was a mad race as people and produce barreled down the ravine. They bang, crash, bounce, and fell on their way to the throat of the river. A green lime for protection escaped one woman's bosom. A few copper cents scattered from another's apron, while one woman lost grip of her pumpkin knife, which got stuck in a wooden box. The evening sun glinted on the blade in every flip the old truck made. The wheel of time started rolling backwards in flashes of rapid scenes from the past. A father had picked some limes for his daughter, and he gave her one to keep on her person. A stone's throw away, a woman and her husband stacked bananas together as sunlight pelted the shadows scoring beside them, and a mother helped her young son with a banana trash cutter to cushion his head from the load of pumpkins he carried. They're all waiting on the same Bedford truck going to the Wednesday market. Memories jerk about in every tumble as the woman pondered life as a daughter, a mother, and a wife. Then everything stopped. Everything. Except high above the rolling slopes, carved by a young river, tumbling off the blue hills, lay a lazy red pole in the middle of the road with a skid mark skirt close to its hind leg. A lazy red pole still chewing its cud.
Thank you. Thank you, Damion. That was beautiful and soft. And I love how you wrap your beautiful language around a landscape in order to conjure it, and then place these enormous happenings and people and characters into it. So that was wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to.
Wow.
You okay? Oh yeah, the power of writing, Damion.
The thing is, like, I haven't mourned. And like I said, this is the first time reading it.
Yeah.
I didn't know this would happen.
Don't worry.
I'm happy it did though. Like,
Mm.
it's time to let it out, I think.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Who's there?
thanks for this. Whoa. Thank you.
That's good. Well, you have your whole. I mean, you're broadening your family now as well with letting people share all of this. So it's lovely. Thank you. Mm.
Well, oh, I'm seeing Miss Johnson. Like, wow, Miss Johnson is here. Miss
Okay.
Johnson was one of the
Yes, Damian.
first.
Morning,
Hello, Miss
Damian. Yes, I'm
Johnson.
here. Hi,
Wow,
Damian. Good to be here
how
with
are you?
you.
Okay.
I'm okay, you guys.
Oh, wow.
You're my
I'm
past
happy you're here.
co-worker.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
happy
yeah.
to be
Like,
here.
when I worked as a primary school teacher, young teacher, just starting out, I
Oh, yes, I
I
remember
really
those
relied
days.
on people like Miss Johnson. Yeah,
Oh,
thank you.
yes, I
Thank you for
remember
being
those
here.
days.
Like,
You're most welcome.
Johnson, thanks for getting up early and being so important and giving
yeah,
us
in Jamaica, yeah, yeah.
entertainment. That's good. So we will go to questions. I did have one for you, just Damien, just to sort of segue out of things. Was part of Barbican first is giving writers that important injection of belief from the world into who they are, because it's hard
Right.
sort of sustaining yourself on self-belief. So that's part of it all. But then you have sustained yourself with self-belief. And often when you're writing, you think, why the hell am I doing this? It's wonderful, I think, but I think it, no one cares and all of that. And you carry on. And there you are, you've got a young family, you're living out there in Tokyo, you're
Right.
working, day and night teaching people English and you're creating money, sustaining, managing to stay alive. So, so what's your pattern of a week or a month, whatever? How do you keep that writer in you going?
It's like it doesn't matter what I say, it's gonna seem like an excuse because writers write and they make the time. Uh, I started out, well, it's all persistence. Like I just got to the point where I say, you know what? I have to make my faith stronger than my worry. And it was just like I don't care anymore if it's gonna sell or whatever, I'm just gonna write. And I was happy when, you picked it up and you saw some value in it. I was happy for that. But I was at the point where I'm like, I'm just doing this. If one person would have it would be a success for me. But in terms of like a process, like for me now, I started writing 500 at 5. That was my thing. 500 words at 5 a.m. And that went quickly. Like it doesn't work for me anymore. I can't do it. I have to get up early for work and all that. But then I found a very, I won't say useful strategy because like T's here and I can see her looking up like so what I did in the hospital, I started recording my stories. And then I started just telling the stories. So in the mornings, I would kill tea with them. Like I just tell her the stories, and she has to pick up like, where am I? Am I in this chapter or who am I? And so what I did, I keep telling the stories until I know them, and then I would just do one sitting and write it.
That's good.
Yeah, that has worked for me. That has worked for
Yeah.
me.
So make your iPhone your friend.
Yeah, but
An
like
important key into your
now
life.
I'm trying not to rely on it. So
Yeah,
I will tell the stories, and by the time I get to sitting to write it, there will be variations, but I would know exactly where I'm going and so on. So
that's good.
I'm not even recording these days. I'm truly a modern griot right now. I'm just telling
Excellent.
stories. Yeah.
Good.
Right.
You
There's a
have to
couple
have
of,
more.
I noticed there's a couple of questions in the chat, which
Okay.
it would be good
Yeah.
to look at. There's one from Jolie who says, I'm in my final portfolio right now with Hull University and also planning to write a novel in stories. Have so many techniques and ideas I want to try. What advice would you have for being unable to do it all within one book? Was it difficult to decide what to include and what to sadly leave out?
Oh wow. The thing is, I think I got most of like an idea of what the book would look like working with Maggie. So if you get attached to the stories, you won't let go of any of it. You need someone on the outside to really help you to let it out into the world. So you have all these writing skills in your toolkit. Um, use them sparingly. Um, get to a point where you find that the stories are no longer yours. Once they're written, they're going to go through the process of other people scrutinizing them. They're going to be interpreting them in ways you didn't even intended. So you have to develop that side of writing where you can allow the stories to be what they can be outside of your understanding. It is something you love, but you have to start thinking about the stories not being yours. You're just a conduit through which you're going to share this part of you with the world. I hope that helps. And also, I think you should look at books that have tried these techniques that you're exploring and try to create something that is uniquely yours. I move through writing with the idea that there's at least one other person that will read it, and that's what the conversation is. Just need one other person to read it. I hope that helps.
Great answer, Damien. And then there's another question from Joe Appleton. I really love the sensual imagery in your writing. Which writers inspire you?
Wow. Gene Toomer and Toni Morrison. I don't think, and Claude McKay. I don't think anybody write about the environment or anything for that matter with descriptive language. It's not just, I think with Toni Morrison having this expanded metaphor, like she can write an entire paragraph, an entire chapter extending a metaphor, and you just get lost in it. And I think that's how your writing come alive. And I hold on to that, and I use that in my writing. So you'll get to the end of a story, and you'll realize that I'm still talking about something I introduced in the initial part of the story. I think those persons, Gene Toomer, how he went to the South and he was experiencing the South, and he was going through his own issues, and but how he spoke about it, he gave, it was more than personification. He gave inanimate things life. They were living, breathing, and I admire stuff like that.
Great. Lovely.
Something I just wanted to pick up on from the conversations there, Damien, and also thank you so much for the wonderful readings. Lots of praise in the chat for that. I think it's
Thank you.
working on the book was great. It was because as I sort of got into reading through it, I could really hear the characters, but listening to you read it, not just the voices, but the whole performance of it. And as you talked about oral storytelling, and you can really get a real sense of that. I just wanted to pick up on that kind of point you were making about how this started off. You were recording that, and you were using that essentially as you were speaking the stories first before you wrote them, and that was that a technique you used before? Is that you say now you're kind of not doing that, but do you think that is there use in that, do you think, for the writing process? Do you think that starting off as a story that you can really tell and you can really you know it by heart before you kind of put that down and write? And is that something that
Great.
you would recommend as a technique? Is that something you might explore again in the
Oh,
future?
definitely. This is how I'll do things from now on. Like traditionally, this is how we tell stories. Growing up, we would meet in like an outdoor kitchen as kids, all cousins or whatever, and we would sit. If it's raining, we get stories. So we would sit and listen to stories, and then when someone has a story done, then someone else join in. So this is something I am accustomed to, listening to stories, telling stories. But in terms of recording, that was an idea shared on the MA program, like at Hull. The writer's diary and recording stories, these are ideas that came out of that community. And I tried everything at least once. I think it was useful to try and see if it was for me. And I think recording it was a beautiful technique. But at my age, I'm getting older, and as an educator, you have to try to ensure that you protect your brain. So I'm challenging myself. I'm committing stuff to memory and so on. So that's important for me. I will definitely go back to recording, but I prefer to think about the stories and tell them at this point. And I
That's
think persons should just to listen to yourself, listen to how it sounds before you send it out. I think that's a wonderful experience.
That's so interesting, Damien. And actually, I found that I read the stories when I was editing them. I would read them
Right.
because aloud, because the sound was so important. So sometimes, it wasn't so much even what it was saying, it was the way it sounded that seemed to be
Yeah.
um,
The
the thing.
incantation, like
Yeah,
I missed that too, so I wanted to hear that rhythm, that the cadence. It's
yeah,
important. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
One of the important things about that for me from your book as well is how you give different types of songs and incantations to all your characters. So it's not just a storyteller with using a voice, but you're
Right.
ventriloquizing all these other voices, all these other characters come in, and so we know people from how they speak and the patterns of their language and the imagery they choose. There's often real surprise in the language. You populate the whole world with people's stories and people's voices.
That was another challenge too. Like I took that challenge because when I read about short stories, I don't consider myself only a short story writer, but I love the short form. And one of the things I read is that you should have a limited amount of characters. So I took it as a challenge to introduce a lot of characters. And I'm even if you look at some of the stories, when I get a bit overwhelmed, I'll allow a character to just get out of the frame and then come back or so on. And it's a good practice. Like I think if I can write all these characters and they gel and persons aren't confused and they can track these characters, I think that's a success. And I think it was a good challenge to take.
Yeah.
I
yeah.
If we
like
go back to your
overloading.
story, to those little storytelling shacks, maybe one was get together and now you and your cousins and you're telling stories to each other. Are you just saying recreating that shack with all these characters telling their stories and coming and going?
Right, right.
Yeah.
But the thing too is like I think about while we're talking, this scene comes up in my head like before while they were waiting on, you know, if they'll get a driver to go to the market and so on, and you have this burst of characters in one scene, and someone is knocking a lotion bottle, and someone is making tea, and this is how the culture is. This is the Caribbean. And I needed that because it's the complete opposite in Japan.
Yeah.
So all the quiet and all the order and so on, like I missed that. So it was an interesting writing experience to just go in that. So yeah, I was rebelling about what I was experiencing at the time here. So I could go back to the Caribbean.
Fantastic.
Enjoyable.
It's been good to get to know this rebel side of Damien that you keep telling people don't do
No,
this and
keep
you
it
say
hidden,
I'll do
keep
it,
it
I'll
hidden.
try it on.
There's one last question in the chat
Okay.
from T. Tangerine
Oh,
and 123 Acres of Unsound Minds have very strong themes that could be considered controversial, especially from a Caribbean person's perspective. How
mhm.
easy or challenging was it to write them? You have 2 minutes, Damien.
Okay. All right. So I think at some point you have to understand that as a writer, you're going to get in trouble. There's, I was exploring sexual orientation. I was exploring how persons are treated with mental health and so on. And there are persons who don't like this side of a story. But if we keep censoring these stories, when do these characters get to tell their stories, basically? Um, I don't believe as a writer I'm ever going to be restricted in writing to please anyone. All the characters, whatever their sexual orientation, whatever their religion, they're going to be treated with respect, dignity, and the same amount of danger I give all characters. And I think that's a freedom writers need to have to be able to write about whatever they want to write about. I'm sure there are other persons who would feel like they're more fitted to write about a particular topic, but I'm putting my best foot forward. My readers know that this is who I am and this is what they can expect. I'm going to write about whatever I want to write about, and I'm going to treat all my characters with the same dignity and the same danger. But just to answer T, because we can talk about it later, to be honest, I did some research before I wrote that story. I did the Mental Health Act, I did the Obia Act, and these stories are informed with facts, and it doesn't matter how you feel about them, you have to contend with these taboos. You have to deal with it. And at some point, the sooner the better, I think.
You said earlier and about being you become a conduit for your story, and I could think
Right.
that's it. You know these characters want to come through, and you clean yourself enough, and you educate yourself enough that you can do that. So I
Right.
thank you a lot, Damien, and I'm going to pass over, I think, to Maggie to round us off because you've had this quite strong relationship. So Maggie, launch away.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Damien. That was really wonderful. I think we should do an audiobook of these stories because the way you read is so fantastic and so moving. And they are stories that need to be read aloud, I think,
Oh, wow.
to get the full beauty of the prose. Thank you so much, everyone else, for joining. It's been a privilege to share your work, Damien, to be involved in editing it and seeing it go out into the wider world. So I think that's all I can say.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot, Damien, and thanks for bringing us magnificent worlds and inviting us to share these riches of your traditions and family and storytelling.
Thank you
Thank you all.
too. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thanks.
Bye.